As required by the FCC, WIUX must offer equal opportunity to other candidates for public office when a political candidate plans on being on air. WIUX has reached out to Liz Watson's political opponent, Trey Hollingsworth, for an on-air interview. He has declined for the time being. The views expressed in this interview are of the interviewer Tanner Chaille and Liz Watson and are completely independent of the views of WIUX. Liz Watson is a fifth-generation Hoosier and a labor and employment attorney who recently had her first foray into the political scene when she ran for the Democratic candidacy in Indiana's 9th Congressional District. She won the nomination, and I'm very pleased to be sitting with her here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming. How are you doing today?
It's a beautiful day. We got our first real day of fall.
Oh, I'm very excited, yes.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. If it's all right with you, I'm just going to jump into some questions.
Absolutely.
All right. So what sort of things did you witness or experience around your own community that kind of inspired you to make the choice to run for the seat?
So, what we're seeing here in the 9th District, and I have been out in all 13 counties. Our district runs from Greenwood and Franklin all the way down to Clark and Floyd County, so that's Sellersburg and Jeffersonville and New Albany, and it includes everything in between. I'm from right here. There are a lot of folks who are struggling, who can't afford to fill their prescriptions, who don't have the health care they need, who can't afford to go to college or make that decision to take out a whole bunch of loans, and then are mired in a mountain of debt. We're seeing, hard work not paying off anymore for people. And I think that's wrong. And I am a workers' rights attorney, and I'm somebody who has really spent my career trying to make it so that working families can get ahead. But I have watched folks like Trey Hollingsworth for too long rig the economy against hardworking Hoosiers and hardworking folks across this country, and it's not okay. It's not okay that our neighbors and friends are being threatened with having their health insurance taken away by Trey Hollingsworth's votes in Congress, just so he can get a big fat check from the insurance industry. It's not okay that prescription drug prices are out of reach for so many families because folks like Trey Hollingsworth need to take a whole bunch of money from the pharmaceutical industry. It's not okay that they're not lifting a finger to bring down the cost of college. And these are things we can do something about, but we've got to put folks in who share our values and whose votes can't be bought.
Right. So you talked about health insurance. So what other aspects besides prescription drugs, which is obviously a very important issue, what other aspects of the current health insurance framework do you feel are inadequate in meeting the needs of Americans and Hoosiers?
Well, our healthcare system, there's no transparency in it. Last night I was holding a town hall on corruption in Washington, in Sellersburg. And, a woman at the town hall talked about how she was trying to get a prescription drug. And, I can't remember exactly what the costs were she quoted, but it was like, initially she was told it was $500. And then she was told, she could mail away for it and get it for less. But, that might not be covered actually as a prescription. And what was the actual cost of the drug? She had no idea, And so we hear this all the time that people aren't getting the care they need, that they're not getting coverage. I had a town hall on healthcare where there was a gentleman who was silent the whole time. And I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what your story is. And afterward, he came up to me and he said, I haggled for months and months with the insurance companies to cover the treatment my wife needed. And while I was back and forth on the phone with them for hours every day, she died. And so we have a system that's profiting off illness. And the bottom line of any healthcare system ought to be making sure that people who are sick have a fighting chance to get better. And right now, our healthcare system is skating away from that. And it's really about allowing insurance companies to profit. It's about allowing pharmaceutical companies to profit. And the goal ought to be to keep costs down, to make care affordable. Yes, to make sure that our doctors get paid well. Of course, that should happen. But we can do those things and also keep costs, affordable for ordinary Hoosiers. I was just blown away last week. I was in my high school. I'm a Bloomington High School South graduate. Go Panthers. And I was asking the high school students, 14 to 18-year-old students, what's on your mind? The first issue, 3 in a row, the students brought up was healthcare costs. And it had to do with being worried about whether their parents were going to get the treatment they needed to be there for them, being worried about whether their parents were going to be able to put food on the table if they spent that money on healthcare. And these are the costs above and beyond insurance, right? And because Trey Hollingsworth voted to take away healthcare, that's our current congressman, Joseph Albert Hollingsworth III of Tennessee, because he voted to take away healthcare, from 400,000 Hoosiers, it's very clear, that his allegiances lie with the insurance industry that wants to be able to issue junk plans that don't cover any, real illness, that will say, oh, it's a Saturday, you can't come to the hospital today on our plan. His allegiances lie with the pharmaceutical industry. And I think our allegiance should lie with Hoosiers. So that's what I'm concerned about doing. I am a supporter of Medicare for All. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I was just going to say, as we all know, the Affordable Care Act has been under attack by the current administration. But you, like many progressive candidates, do support Medicare for All. So what's your philosophy in regards to that issue, and why do you think that can really help Hoosiers in specific?
Great question. So, look, I think we can walk and chew gum on this. We absolutely cannot go back to the days when a pre-existing condition was a death sentence, and that's what repealing the Affordable Care Act would do. I have talked to so many Hoosiers, who have said, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have coverage. I've got diabetes. I have cancer. These are life and death decisions. And Trey Hollingsworth voted without meeting with Hoosiers first to take away coverage from people with pre-existing conditions. That's not okay. So we need to protect the health care that we have. Frankly, the 400,000 Hoosiers who got coverage from the health care law, that coverage is what's paying for most of the opioid treatment across southern Indiana. We have a serious opioid problem. So we need to keep that coverage. We need to continue to bring down costs, and we need to have a big vision like Medicare for All. We still have 48,000 Hoosiers in the 9th District who are uninsured, no insurance at all. So we need to make sure in the richest nation on earth that every single person has health care coverage. This is just basic, right? It's basic decency. It's basic humanity to make sure that we're providing coverage to everyone. And frankly, when we do that, it's going to mean that people can get preventive care, that they're not going into the emergency room with acute illnesses. It's going to mean a healthier population that's able to contribute to our economy and not have to sit on the sidelines because they've gotten so sick and injured that they're unable to work. The gains in terms of our health, our happiness, our productivity as a nation are going to be through the roof. Honestly, leaving people for dead and dying, it's inhumane, it's immoral, but it's also bad economic policy.
Yeah, right. So you kind of touched on this in that answer, but I want to kind of go a bit further into it because it's an issue for a lot of Hoosiers. So Indiana is one of the states that's been most affected by the opioid crisis. What sort of things do you believe should or could be implemented to kind of battle this epidemic and get Hoosiers back on their feet?
Yeah. So this comes down to values. We need to make a real investment in prevention, harm reduction, and treatment here in Indiana. And we're seeing, I have gone to so many community conversations about the opioid crisis, and every time I go, the conversation usually starts with a parent talking about having lost a child. And I'm in tears and, listening to these stories. And we have to really make a serious investment in this problem if we're going to turn things around. And right now, the things we're doing, the things that this Congress is touting, they're just a drop in the bucket. And that's not going to work. We know that in 2015, Scott County, which is here in our district, Scottsburg, right, in Austin, where the HIV and Hep C, it was the epicenter of that outbreak. And these are things we can avoid if we get serious about harm reduction, prevention, and treatment, and about funding that treatment. So right now, all across the 9th District, we have people who cannot afford to stay in treatment facilities. We have mental health care professionals who can't afford to continue to do the work of sitting across the table from folks in recovery and helping them get better. Did you know these jobs pay like $11 to $13 an hour? You can't support a family.
No.
I talked to a man in Jackson County who himself was in recovery, who was doing the really important work of being a recovery specialist and sitting across the table every day from people who were in the grips of addiction, trying to make it to the other side. And really, who better to have that conversation than somebody who's been there and come through it, right? And he told me, he said, I did this, I loved the work, but I was earning $11 an hour and I had a small child and I had to quit. because I couldn't afford it. So there's a bill called the Strengthening Addiction Treatment and Recovery Workforce Act. I don't have that quite right, but it's about that, that Senator Donnelly has co-sponsored, and it would put funding toward allowing people to get some loan forgiveness who are willing to go into the mental health and recovery field to help folks dealing with substance abuse. That's really important because we have a mental health desert across the 9th District in 12 out of the 13 counties. My mom's a clinical psychologist here in Bloomington, actually. Monroe County is the one county that is not classified federally as a mental health desert. But in the other 12 counties, people can't get access to the care they need. So we need to do something about that. There is a bill called the CARE Act, which is co-sponsored by Senator Warren and it's Elijah Cummings in the House. And the CARE Act is kind of like the Ryan White bill that was passed to really put a very comprehensive and serious effort into responding to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. It does the same thing. And so it would bring $50 million to Indiana every year for 10 years to solve the opioid crisis. And we need to do that. Opioid deaths in Indiana have doubled over the last 3 years. And so, deaths from overdose. And we need to make these very serious investments into having the resources to get people the help they need. And, we can't continue to say the money isn't there for that. The money was there for Trey Hollingsworth when he wanted a $4.5 million tax cut. He was happy to add $1.9 trillion to our national debt to give tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. Well, how about looking out for Hoosiers in our community? Right. What about that? I don't know too many people in the 9th District. Actually, I don't know anyone in the 9th District besides Trey Hollingsworth with a $58 million net worth. He doesn't understand our problems because he's not one of us, and it's not okay that he thinks that he can come here, rip us off, get tax cuts for him and his super rich friends and the giant corporations that are bankrolling his seat in Congress, and take the money away from us that could be used to improve our communities, whether we're talking about to address the opioid crisis or to get rural broadband, across the 9th District, or roads, bridges, highways, modernize our public schools, invest in improving our public housing stock. I mean, these are investments we need as Hoosiers. And, somebody that was willing to, add $1.9 trillion to our national debt. And by the way, before he left the House to campaign for re-election to buy his second term, he voted to make those tax cuts permanent year over year over year for him. So he will continue to get that massive loophole that he's now benefiting from that gives him a $4.5 million tax cut, the corporate pass-through provision. He'll continue to get that every single year, and that adds another $2 to $3 trillion to our debt over 10 years. It's the most fiscally irresponsible measure a Congress has taken in decades. It's this theory of trickle-down economics that if we give giant tax breaks to the rich, giant tax breaks to corporations, that somehow the folks who go to work every day and get their hands dirty and come home tired are going to see a benefit. That's crap, and we all know it. I'm sorry, are we allowed to say that on the air?
Sure. I mean,
okay.
As far as I know. Yeah. I mean, I can hear the passion in your voice. I think that's the most important part. So, I mean, just talking about Trey Hollingsworth, it's very clear that probably to everyone listening, you have very different positions and nearly across the board. Unfortunately, though, you've not had the opportunity to kind of bring these positions up to him in some sort of debate facilitated, setting. So do you have any statement in response to Representative Trey Hollingsworth's apparent refusal to debate you or other opposing candidates in the past? And what would you like to see him address in regard to his history as a congressional representative?
Well, look, he has refused to hold a single debate. He has refused to hold town halls. Here's how I define a town hall. It's an open public meeting that you advertise in advance and make available to the public. He has not done that. I have held town halls on jobs, on infrastructure, on medical marijuana, on the opioid crisis, on public education, on student debt, and actually on a lot of these topics. And we just did one on cleaning up Washington and the corruption in Congress and the problem of dark money in politics last night. On a lot of these, I've actually held multiple town halls on the issue because I would do it in one county and then another county wanted to talk about it on health care. We've had a number. it's really important that whoever wants to represent us is willing to show up and talk about ideas and hear from voters. Frankly, how are you going to know what you're supposed to do to help improve people's lives right here in Southern Indiana if you don't meet with people? It makes no sense. But Trey Hollingsworth meets behind closed doors with corporate lobbyists who write his campaign checks, and then he does whatever they want any day of the week. He made a beeline for the Financial Services Committee when he got to Congress. And what he's done on that committee is vote always in favor of Wall Street instead of Main Street. There was a group called the Americans for Financial Reform that looked at 74 votes that the Financial Services Committee had taken. 71 out of 74 times, Trey Hollingsworth sided with big corporations over regular people. He wants to take us back to the days and roll back the financial regulations that would prevent another financial crisis and send us into a recession. He wants to make it, he actually introduced legislation to allow big banks to issue payday loans at up to 300% interest rates. I mean, these are all-out attacks on working families. These are attacks on the working class, attacks on the middle class, all to help out the 1% and the giant corporations. And that's not okay because, I've spent a lot of time in the 9th District. I can tell you, you can go to Cordon, Marengo, you can look in Paoli, you can check out Seymour, look in Martinsville, look in Nashville. You will not see skyscrapers in our district. Wall Street is not in our district. We need somebody who answers to Main Street, who answers to Hoosiers. And that's what I want to do. I am a Hoosier, and maybe that's why I think that's so important. Trey Hollingsworth, I'm a fifth-generation Hoosier. I wish he would show up for one of these interviews and you could ask him what generation Tennessean he is. It'd be fun to know.
It would be fun to know. So you spoke about a lot of the cities and towns within this district, and I want to talk specifically about Bloomington. So as we all know, Bloomington is the home of Indiana University, and if you're elected, you'll be representing the almost 50,000 IU students. So why do you feel well-equipped to represent the specific interests of the significant portion of college-age students in Monroe County?
That's a great question. So I have spent a lot of time talking with students. So I've taught here in SPIA and at the law school, and also spent time talking with students about, what is of most concern. And I've heard about a lot of different things. I've certainly heard about healthcare. I've heard about the problem of people coming out of college with a mountain of debt, not knowing how they're ever going to repay it. I've heard concerns about having a livable planet. I've heard concerns about racial justice. I've heard concerns about women's rights. I've heard concerns about this administration's apparent attacks on LGBTQ Americans. College students are really worried about their future. They're worried about the kind of world that that they're entering into. And what's been so exciting to me has been seeing the way in which we actually have a really serious college student contingent on our campaign, and seeing the way in which college students are fighting for their future and saying, no, it's not okay. You can't rob us of the opportunities that were there for the last generation and ought to be there for us. And so I've watched that happen, and that's really been very inspiring to me to get to spend that time with students. And, Trey Hollingsworth is taking 80% of his donations from corporate PACs. When you don't do that, when, you understand that you answer to the people in your district, that's when you're able to have these kinds of conversations. And of course, so my dad went to college at IU Bloomington on the GI Bill. He was the first in his family to go to college. It was that federal investment that catapulted our family into the middle class. Then he taught here for years and years. So I grew up around and at this university, and it's certainly home to me, and I care very deeply about it.
That's wonderful. So throughout the interview, I've heard a lot of kind of stalwart progressive issues that you've brought up, from college debt to healthcare to medical marijuana. So despite running as a Democrat, you've been unafraid to push left of center, where a lot of Democratic candidates won't. To that end, what are some institutional changes you'd like to see to the party's position and approach?
So look, I think it's time for candidates who are going to say no to corporate PAC money, who are going to stand up to special interests, and who are going to show up and be transparent. And so that's exactly what I have done in my campaign. I have not taken a dime of corporate PAC money. I've run a grassroots campaign. I think the last quarter our average donation was $37. And people have stood with us. I think it's about actually getting back to understanding that the job of a representative is to fight for the people you represent. I think we need to talk more about love and compassion in our politics, and we need to wear it on our sleeve. This is a time where there are forces that are trying to let hate and division win, and we need to remember what this country is about. The ideals of justice, equality, liberty, those are things we can fight for, and they're worth fighting for. So that's what I've been doing on this campaign. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of the support I've gotten from Hoosiers across this district. I think we need to remember our labor unions, that it's labor really that built the middle class here in southern Indiana and across this country. And right now we have an attack on organized labor. My opponent is a union buster, and that is not okay, that he has taken every opportunity he can to roll back worker protections. I think I have more labor support than any candidate running in the United States of America right now. Right. And I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, through your work as a labor attorney, I'm sure that you are one of the best people to stand up for their rights. Well, Liz, thank you so much for being with us here today. It's been a wonderful opportunity to speak with you. Do you have any final comments you want to just throw in before we wrap this up?
Hi, folks. So I wanted to let you know where I am going to be on October 19th, which is a Friday. I will be at Dunn Meadow, and I'm having a giant rally at Dunn Meadow, and folks at the rally are going to be walking with Bernie Sanders to the Early Vote Center to get our votes in. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really honored to have Senator Sanders' endorsement. He's actually kicking off a campaign tour for a few candidates across the country running for governor and different things. And he's kicking it off in Bloomington on October 19th in Dunn Meadows. So we've got information about that on our website. And it's going to be really exciting. It's a really wonderful thing that folks are recognizing just how important this election is here in the 9th District. We have the opportunity to take our seat back and have somebody who understands what Hoosiers want and need and who's going to show up each and every day and fight for us in Congress.
Well, that is really exciting. I hope it goes well. And thank you again so much for coming into the studio today. It's been an honor to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So as required by the FCC, WIUX must offer equal opportunity to other candidates for public office when a political candidate plans on being on air. WIUX has reached out to Liz Watson's political opponent, Trey Hollingsworth, for an on-air interview. He has declined for the time being. The views expressed in this interview are of the interviewer Tanner Chaille and Liz Watson and are completely independent of the views of WIUX. For WIUX News, this is Tanner Chaille. Thank you for listening.